Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another True Hope Tuesday. It is June 27th, and welcome. I'm Pastor David. Nice of you to be here with me today. I thought I was going live, but I'm having a little issue with my Zoom today, so this is going to get put on YouTube a little bit later. I apologize for that. Hope you will join me, and since we won't be chatting, excuse me, I hope you will leave me some comments and I'll get to answering those right away. So we are in part 4 of Divine Not Slime, and we're talking about the creationist worldview versus the secular worldview. A lot of that argument has to do with our origins. Are they based on what the Bible tells us, or are they based on what the secular materialistic world tells us it is, which is billions of years, random chance, no creator. The biblical view is thousands of years, and God created everything. And before he created that, it was just God. So, two very distinctly different worldviews, and we cannot talk about the argument of worldviews if we don't talk about evolution, which we started to talk about last week in part 3. And we can't talk about evolution unless we talk about Charles Darwin, often referred to as the father of evolution. And what we mean by that is, and what he means by that is macroevolution, where all life came from that primordial pool of slime, and by happenstance and chance over billions of years, here we are today. Now, I don't know about you, but it takes a lot less faith for me to believe in the Bible version than that. But let's talk about Charles Darwin. Let's talk about who he was and what he was doing. So, interestingly, he was born in 1809. And the interesting part of that is that was the same year Abraham Lincoln was born. So that gives you some context in terms of what time period we're talking about. So very early 19th century. And he was raised in the gentrified class. His father was a physician. His grandfather had been a physician. And he was raised in society. Much was expected of him. He was expected to follow in the family footsteps. As it turned out, Charles did not really take to the medical realm. And being that he was in a group of people in a family that was very concerned about their social standing, he was going to have to come up with something pretty good to appease his family, especially his father. Well, his father sort of came up with it for him. He said, you'll take holy orders, you'll become a parish clergyman, and you'll write sermons, and you'll live a very respectful and respectable life. And so that was the plan for him as a young man. His father was quoted as saying he was afraid that Charles would become an idle sportsman, going hunting and fishing and nothing more. That wasn't going to do in the Darwin family. So about this time, and again, he was very socially connected, he was invited to go on a journey aboard ship with a Captain Fitzroy, I believe, and going on a surveying journey to the South American coastline. And he was going not as a scientist, but as a companion for the captain. In those days in particular, you couldn't associate with the crew if you were the captain, etc. So, and this was not unusual. He hired on or was asked on as a companion for the captain so they could talk about things and play cards and what have you. So he said, yes, sign me up. He wasn't really that into becoming a clergyman. And so that 2-year journey turned into 5. And everybody became aware of just how good an observer Charles was. And he was very attuned to what was going on around him, and he loved it. And so he was an early naturalist, is what we would call him. So that's where he got on the Beagle. You probably heard about that. This is where he went to the Galapagos and studied the tortoises, the finches, the iguanas, etc. So that's a little bit of what gets you to Charles Darwin's adulthood. Interestingly, taking holy orders was more of a, and becoming a clergyman was more of a social construct, if you will. He had no affinity for Christianity, no affinity for God, and this is well documented. Nor did his father, nor did his grandfather. His grandfather's name was Erasmus, and he was quite a powerful figure, even though Charles never met him. He was a great influence, and he had written about this idea that there was not a creator, that life sprang from nothing and then became more elaborate and more complex. And so Charles had this sort of background, if you will. So from there, Charles comes back. He has all this information gathered from the voyage, and he's thinking a lot about our origins, where we came from. And again, in that early 19th century, there was a lot of scientific thought coming out of Europe, Germany in particular, that was very much aligned with what Darwin was thinking in terms of life coming from not God, right? Abiogenesis. Life became from nothing. There was no creator. And there were some contemporaries along this time. Alfred Russel Wallace, he was in Australia at the time when Darwin was on the Beagle, and he quite separately had written his own hypothesis about natural selection and where we came from, and they traded papers. And interestingly, Darwin wasn't that anxious to publish, but he had a benefactor, cheerleader by the name of, I think it was Huxley, known as his Darwin's bulldog, and he was really pushing, and he pushed Darwin to finally publish, and he published ahead of Wallace. And so Darwin gets a lot of the credit for a hypothesis that many people were looking into at that time. And I use the word hypothesis because although it's often referred to as the theory of evolution, right? A theory is something you take to a lab and you study and you test using the scientific method. So this doesn't rate as high as a theory. It's just a hypothesis or a supposition, or at its most plainly spoken, an opinion. Okay. Unfortunately, today, often, the evolutionary story of our origins is taught as fact. In fact, you'll see it in print, on TV, in movies, on advertisements. I just saw a story today, came in on my phone, which is the only, I don't get a newspaper, I don't watch, TV news, but I get plenty just on my little phone. And it was talking about some cave paintings, which said, oh, now we know this group of people painted these 1.5 million years ago. That was just in today's news, one little blurb, and nobody questions it. And so this rise of evolutionary thought has crept in because people accepted it. And why did they accept it, you may ask? And that's an excellent question. And I'll give you the answer as far as I understand and from what I've studied. The appeal of this was that you did not have to answer to God. There was no biblical story. There was no Adam and Eve. There's no Eden. There's no fall of mankind. There is no 10 commandments to follow. And so there's this freedom, I think is how they would put it, in accepting that version. So it caught on like wildfire. It just became, and now in many states, like California, where I'm from, in public schools, you cannot teach the creationist story. So all you get is the evolutionary story, or Darwinism, as evolution is often called. So that's a little bit about Charles Darwin, how he got started. There are some other interesting facts. And one of the greatest distinctions that needs to be made in the two trains of thought is how we treat life. So Darwin did not keep anything, that's not the right term. Darwin did not separate humanity from any other life form. So to him and his thinking, all life was of equal weight, of value, of equal origin, etc. Okay, so if that's your way of thinking, that human life is no different than any other species, well, that can lead to some pretty awful attitudes and practices of life, as opposed to the biblical view, which gives us a creator, God. It gives us a way to live. It tells us where we're from, why we're here, and where we're going. Okay, the evolutionary thought of origins and living life does not give you that. That's a very important distinction. And I'm going to get to one of the reasons and one of the examples of just how important that distinction is. Because when we talk about Darwin, we're talking about evolution. We're talking about a godless origin story. I think that's important to know that's the kernel of the story is the biblical view as God-centered at its head. The Darwinist view or the materialistic view or the evolutionary view, there is no creator. So there is no source of moral attitude, moral integrity, moral rules, etc. So, okay, that's pretty huge. Just like the evolutionary story requires billions of years to get from the slimy pool to us, and the biblical view just needs a few thousand years because that's what God has spoken to us about in his word, the Holy Scriptures. So let me jump to an example of where evolutionary, Darwinist, godless view of our origins and explanation of life and how one lives her life, where that could lead to. So in about, I think this started turn of the last century, 1919, 1920, definitely into the late 20s, early 1930s. A philosophy and worldview came into existence, and it was called eugenics. And eugenics was all about favored races, favored characteristics, and thus there was an unfavored, non-favored group or existence, whether it was social, political, physical primarily. So eugenics became this philosophy, this way of life. I think philosophy is the closest thing I can come to, but it was also an origin story in that, like Darwin's, he has two great tomes he wrote, The Descent of Man and The Origin of the Species. And it's interesting that those are what we call name his books, but they had longer titles in print. The first being The Descent of Man and Natural Selection in Relation to Sex, and The Origin of the Species by means of natural selection and the preservation of favored races in the struggle for life. Note that favored races. So now we're jumping ahead, 100 years almost, and this theory of eugenics springs forward, and it's about this very thing, natural selection. And people said, well, certain people are being naturally selected because they are favored. They are better than others. You can see where this is going, I reckon. And so people like Adolf Hitler, man, jumped on this bandwagon. That was part of what you could call his theory. Obviously, he had the Aryan race was the favored species. This is right out of Darwin's writings. This is what his view of life can lead to. And it did. We all know about what happened with Hitler. Here's another little more modern person you may have heard of, Margaret Sanger. Does that ring a bell? She coined the phrase birth control, and she started what is today Planned Parenthood. If you read her other writings or listen to her recordings even, because again, she's coming up with this in the 30s initially, it's all about favored races, favored mentalities. She was all about sterilizing. You ready for this? Sterilizing, right? Birth control, sterilizing people who were not smart enough, sterilizing people whose skin color was not light enough. She was about controlling our species. Not very natural selection, if you ask me, but selection nonetheless. Again, she's going back to this framework of a godless origin. And well, we know what became of so much human life under Margaret Sanger's guise. We know what happened with Hitler. We know what happened with all communist, Marxist, godless, by decree, godless societies, right? Whether it's Mao or Lenin, Stalin, right? Hitler. We know how many millions of people were murdered, were annihilated because they did not follow this godless view. Millions and millions and millions of people. And it's happening today. So this is why it's important to know the difference between these two worldviews. It's incredible how Darwinism grew so much. But again, if you've read your Bible lately, especially if you've read Daniel and then follow that up with Revelation, the Bible tells us where things are headed. It tells us where we've been, who we are, who God wants us to be. It tells us where we're going. And read Revelation, you're seeing all of this prophesied about, right? Thousands of years ago. It's right there in black and white. So it shouldn't surprise us. And I do these shows to bring encouragement to you all, to encourage you to know the Lord or to know him better, to put your faith, your trust, your hope in Jesus and not in man. And so this may seem a little heavy, but it's so vital. And this is no reason to fear what's happening around us. It just gives us the knowledge to fight against it. And part of the knowledge is knowing the other side, the other view. And then, of course, it's knowing and studying and being well-versed in our view, in the creationist worldview, the biblical worldview. Because this is how we defend our faith. This is how we shine God's light into that darkness. And that evolutionary thought, that racist, hateful, deadly thought needs to be brought to the light. It needs to be exposed. And we as believers, as followers of Jesus Christ, we are to bring that light and shine it into the darkness. And we do that cordially, politely, with a smile, and with the confidence to share with others the truth, capital T, truth. And I guarantee you, as you study this more and more, you will come to find that it takes very little faith to believe in the biblical story compared to believing in billions of years and random chance. I don't know about you, but my life is not random. It's not chance. It's not meaningless. It has purpose. It has direction. It has a past. I know where I came from. I know why I'm here. I know where I'm going. And I know how much God loves me. and I know how much he loves you. So I hope this has been very interesting and enlightening and educational for you. Charles Darwin is a fascinating figure, fascinating character, and there's much out there written about him. And he's written very much. And he had his talents. And he even, just as an end note here, he had questions about his own hypothesis. He did not go to his grave thinking, he was 100% right. The struggle to survive, all the death we see in the world, in nature, from our species on down, was a huge problem for him because he just couldn't understand it. And then the complexity of our physiology, the human eye was one thing that he just could not quite grasp, how that could come from random chance. And we'll talk about irreducible complexity maybe next time, or in one of the next two, we'll talk about irreducible complexity. And that was a real stumbling block for Darwin. And it is interesting that one of his other struggles was with death and suffering, and how much there was. And you see that all around. We see that all around us at every level of nature, from us down to single cells battling it out for supremacy. But what he could not observe was the evolution, or where the uptick was. Where are the new species? Where are the better species? Where are the ones that are surviving? Where historically now, and with the mapping of the human genome, we know that doesn't exist. There is nothing evolving to a more complex, more superior form. Everything is de-evolving. It's de-evolution, not evolution. So I'll leave you with that. Thank you, everybody. God bless you and keep you. It's such an honor and a pleasure to be here with you these Tuesday evenings. And our next one will be the 4th of July. So it'll be recorded, of course. So if you're out enjoying the holiday and being thankful for being in this country and being an American, fantastic. Enjoy the fireworks and all those wonderful 4th of July activities. Until then, God bless and keep you. And I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.